I'm getting pretty tired of the word pandemic, and so I'm gonna call it panda. I'm gonna call it Liminal Panda. Welcome to the Liminal Party, Liminal Panda, the saddest party in the world. And here I am, a disembodied voice sending my humdrum tones into the void. And this voice belongs to a man named Talhah Fadzillah, a fiction author and liminal space enthusiast. And since I am a liminal space enthusiast and fiction author, I tend to write a lot about liminal spaces in my stories. And it's funny because I wrote some of these stories even before I knew the term liminal spaces. I always had an attraction to dark, empty, big empty spaces, like empty food courts. I used to just sit in the parking lot for hours, and at first I thought I was the only one who ever did well, I guess I could still probably be the only one who ever does that. I'm not sure if anybody else does that, even if they enjoy liminal spaces as much as me. I mean, I don't really do it anymore. I mean, I go for quite some walks in the night, very late at night, in fact. I mean, I enjoy the morning as well, but at night, it's just emptier, not much people around. Anyway, I'm probably getting too far off topic right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and say the next thing that I usually say. After I introduce myself, or before I introduce myself, I usually say, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be seeing a slideshow of liminal space photos. And if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, you'll just be hearing me ramble along with some background music. And the story should start, and I'm quite terrible at telling when the story will start, but I'd say about a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes from now, anywhere around that, maybe even 5 minutes. But I put it at about 2 minutes from now. And I'd also like to plug my book right now. It's called Butterflies. It's a psychological horror novel. And at the time, like I said, I didn't know what liminal spaces were, but I wrote about it in this book a lot, and it's a very stream of consciousness kind of book that I wrote. I just sat here and I forced myself to write, and I found that I liked the things that came out of forcing myself to write. And that's kind of what I'm doing with PELLA'S Wish for a Liminal World right now too. So in this book, Butterflies, Psychological Horror, I wrote a lot about corridors and empty spaces and stairwells. And it really is funny because I didn't know that these places were called liminal spaces, and now I know that it is, and I know that there are other people who have interest in these places. And so I'd like for anybody who is like me to read my book. It's available on my website, that is byemberlight.com, byemberlight.com. As for my other fictional works, some of them are not, it's not always all about liminal spaces, although quite a lot of them do feature a lot of liminal spaces. About more than a decade ago, I was writing a book for about 5 years, and I was like a teen by then. And when I read it in my 20s, I read through it after 5 years in the making, and I thought, oh wow, this sucks. And so after 5 years in the making and nearly 80,000 words in the book, I scrapped it. And even in that book, I wrote a lot about liminal space photos. I meant liminal spaces, not liminal space photos. Just take out the photos. But the way I wrote it with my teenage brain, it was just cringeworthy, and I decided against using this version of the book. I still have plans to make this book because I have an attachment to this story. I'm planning to make it my next published book, in fact. probably after Palace Wish for a Liminal World. And by the way, about last episode I said that I'm planning to make it a novel length. I'm thinking about it again, and I'm thinking that I'll probably make it a novella length. That's about 40,000 words, and that's about 8 episodes. And last episode, I mentioned that one episode is 5,000 words. Oh, and by the way, if this is the first episode, it doesn't matter if you're starting from here, because these are all standalone episodes. So just continue as you like. It is, after all, a sleep story or background noise story. Though it is, I might say, you can listen to it if you want, because it is... I would read this book. Me, myself, personally. I don't mean to say that, I don't mean to brag, but I kind of like this kind of stuff. It's kind of boring. So yeah, you can listen to it if you want. And when I'm done with this series, I'm gonna go through it one more time for a re-edit, and then I'm gonna publish it as a book, as an ebook, that is, for purchase on my website again, for all the other boring liminal space people like me to read before bedtime, to calm their nerves, to drown out the noise of the world, the noisy world as it is. And if I said purchase this ebook from my website, I actually meant download it for free, because it's already available for free on YouTube anyway. And I don't mean to bore you with self-promotion, but talk about free. If you sign up for my newsletter, the Amberlight newsletter, you'll get 2 free stories. One is a novella. Wait, hold on, let me check real quick. Yeah, so one is a short story, a horror short story about a blind man with a deaf mute wife, and they're experiencing some strange things in their house. When the blind man hears something, the deaf mute wife sees them, and so they're trying to figure it out together. Like that, and then there's In the End. It's a psychological horror novelette. Novelette is shorter than a novella, and so I think that's about 20,000 words. It's about the guy who wakes up in a hospital one day, and he only has this one strange lady who doesn't have a name to take care of him, and so and he has no memory of the past. And if you want to find out, just read it. I'm not gonna tell you everything about it. Anyway, let's get started with this episode of Palace Wish for a Liminal World. Episode 5, Monozuelo Street. Standing across the street from the unfinished building, Enzo Bozan folds his arm, leans back against a shabby car, and stares at the black concrete skeleton that is the abandoned construction project. When he woke up today, he hadn't planned where to go prior to leaving his house. He had simply brushed his teeth, washed up, slipped into his clothes, left his apartment, and lingered about in the stairwell, lift lobby, and parking lot. He had lingered in those areas for more than 2 hours in total. After that, he had left the apartment building through the basement level parking lot exit, and he had walked around his apartment building for nearly 2 hours more. At the pace of which he usually walks, he had made 3 rounds and then went back down the ramp to the basement parking lot, where he spent another hour in the lift lobby room, staring at the empty notice board, at the blank walls, and up at the fluorescent light. This wasn't the first time Enzo had woken up without a plan for where to go today. In fact, most of his time here in this sleepy town called Palace Wish is spent like this. And even if he wakes up with a plan for where to go, he still spends his days like this, loitering around and taking leisurely strolls where people generally prefer not to spend their time. Places that most people find boring or creepy or both. Even now that Enzo is leaning back against his car across the road from the dead unfinished building beside his apartment building, he still has no idea what place he will be spending his today at. His mind is a blank canvas. Although this is how most of his best days began, and so he is rather optimistic about where he will end up today. Tilting his head up to the sky, he observes the clouds and fog hanging above him like a cozy canopy of white cotton candy. Strands of sunlight stream through whichever crack he can find in the milky canopy above. Though the sunlight is barely bright enough to surround Enzo with its rays, it is hardly ever a sunny day in PELLA'S Wish. This is almost as bright as it can get. At most, the big sun in the sky will only look like it is giving its best fight just to touch the lazy town, but its rays can only touch small, narrow portions of PELLA'S Wish. Leaning away from the car, Enzo tucks his hands in his pockets and checks both sides of the road. The left is the way he would usually take, as there are generally more boring places to go over there. The right leads to Confetti Street. There are other boring places there too, though there are more people living in those areas. Over here in PELLA'S Wish though, more people still doesn't mean much people. Enzo enters his car, winds down his window and checks both sides of the road again before turning the car around to head over to Confetti Street. Still in all, he doesn't know why he is going there and where exactly he will end up. He may even end up further than Confetti Street, or he may end up on the furthest end of Confetti Street. With his window down, he stretches one arm outside as he drives. The cold breeze swirls around his fingers, leaving his fingertips slightly numb. The lazy, lonely trees wave at him as he passes them by. In the slow pace at which Enzo drives, there is a 5-second gap when he drives from one tree and the next. These trees appreciate this much distance between one another. Even as they wave at Enzo as he passes them by, they look as though he is invading their space, although they are too shy to tell him off. At the end of the row of trees, the road opens up to a few roadside shop lots. Most are vacant, some are very much underused, and so little of them are open. Enzo begins counting them with his one hand outside their window. There is a fruit shop. It sells whole fruits, fruit juices, sliced fruits, anything fruit related. That's one shop open on Enzo's right. There is a bookshop on Enzo's left. There are posters pasted on the walls of the books which presumably are being sold there. That's the second shop. There is a computer repair shop on the left too, with laptops and desktop computers looking like scrap metal on shelves and in showcases. That's the third shop. There is a cobbler and a barber, two services sharing one shop lot, so that's the fourth shop. Only 4. That's all the shops open. Enzo didn't even need to lift his thumb to count how many shop lots were open here. He didn't even catch a glimpse of any shopkeepers or patrons inside them. At the end of this road, Enzo reaches a junction. There are 3 routes in this crossroads and 3 traffic lights. There are no other cars apart from Enzo's, waiting behind a red light. It makes him wonder, is there ever a moment in time here where there is more than one car waiting for their light to turn green? It's possible. It's possible that Enzo has never been on this road at the times when there are more than one car waiting at the traffic lights. After all, there are office buildings in this area, few and far between, and Enzo is rarely here when office workers will be heading back home. It is possible that these roads are busier during those times. As busy as the roads in PELLA'S Wish can get, that is, and this is very rare. From what Enzo can remember, there are 4 office buildings in this area, each of them as dead as the other, though there are office workers there. As silent as ninjas they are. They know the rules of this town. This is one of the more active environments around here in PELLA'S Wish. There are places more active than this, as active as PELLA'S Wish can get, although Enzo rarely visits them. It is without conscious thought that Enzo ends up driving up to one of the office buildings in Confetti Street. There is a small convenience store, a nearly hidden shop lot along the outside walkway of the building. Enzo parks his car in the visitor parking space, a yellow square near the walkway pavement, and he sits in the car for a few moments, eyeing the entrance to the lift lobby. Office hours are almost over right now, about an hour before the workers start trickling out from the lift lobby entrance doors. Enzo thinks, what do they do soon after they have left the building? If he were one of them, what would he do? The first thing he would do, possibly, is head straight over to that convenience store. Over there he would get himself some candy. Today is a Thursday, and back when Enzo was in the workforce, Thursdays were candy days. From time to time, Thursdays still are his candy days, though he doesn't have as much of a taste for candy as he used to. When he was younger, his favorites were the colorful ones, small sugar-packed sweets, but as he got older, he grew more of a taste for white chocolate. And further along the years, he became more of a fan of sugarless dark chocolate. There isn't a specific brand that he prefers, for as long as it is either white chocolate or dark chocolate, and it can be in whatever size, shape, and form. These days, though, the occasion in which he indulged in these confectionaries grew further and fewer between. On average, he will have 2 chocolate bars at the same time every 3 weeks that he will savor for 2 whole days. On average, he will have 1 cube an hour, and he will switch between dark and white. Today it seems to be a good day for some candy, and it will go great with some coffee too. First, Enzo would like to go for a stroll around this building before the end of office hours. He would like to beat the office workers to the convenience store, as he is quite positive that some of them will be headed right there as soon as they are done with work. He kills the engine and leaves his car, locking his door before looking both sides of the walkway and contemplating which way he should start walking. Going left or clockwise around the building, he will, at the end of this walkway, end up at a raised platform at the road below. That is not the road he will take to get out of here, and he may not be taking it any time today, so he might as well linger there for a moment. Who knows when he will see that road again? At the back of this building, there will be a small field of grass with a tree in the center of it, as well as a single bench. This isn't an area that Enzo frequents, and so he has only sat on that bench 2 times before. The first time he had sat there, he had looked through a book of art and had stayed there until nighttime. He had been so absorbed by the artworks that he had lost track of time and wasn't aware of his surroundings. The art had been of houses and buildings, each piece with a subtle surrealist spin on it, much like the painting of an endless train station he had purchased from Daydream Plaza. Come to think of it, could some of those artworks in the book been by the same artist of the train station? Enzo begins walking clockwise around the building. At the end of the walkway, he crosses over to the raised platform looking over the main road below. He stands there and runs his eyes across the several houses in a row. People living there are very likely office workers. This is, after all, predominantly an office area. As such, those houses must be empty right now, although there is no way for Enzo to tell from here. If there are occupants in those houses, they may as well stay inside and laze in their rooms, as there really isn't much for them to do outside here, apart from walking around, which surely they have already done 1 time too many. They must be sick of it by now. He heads back over to the walkway and continues with his clockwise course towards the back of the office building, where there is the plot of grassland and the tree in the center. He crosses over to the bench and sits in it under the canopy of leaves. This bench specifically, for whatever strange reason, is a good place to go through an art book as he has done before. The atmosphere here is made for it, and this is what makes this place glorious in its own way. By itself, though, without the art book, it is sufficiently admirable. At most, he can sit here without anything to do for a whole 2 hours. It is a good place to think, although sometimes it brings him back to unpleasant times. When a leaf falls onto Enzo's lap, he picks it up by the stem and runs his thumb along the veins until he is reminded that he intends to go to the convenience store just on the other side of the building. And so he heads back to where his car is parked, as it isn't parked far from the convenience store. In the convenience store, he purchases a white chocolate bar, a dark chocolate bar, 2 cold bottles of coffee, 1 black and 1 with milk, and for old time's sake he got himself a packet of colorful sweets. Straight after this, he gets back inside his car, starts the engine and drives off. At the traffic light, he looks out his window and up at the sky and sees how there is a tinge of pink behind the clouds where the sun is hiding. At the furthest end of Confetti Street, there is a playground nearby a stubby disc-shaped clubhouse. The walls of this building are mostly brown with accents of dark gray. Enzo parks his car at the playground across the street from the clubhouse and kills the engine but remains in the car. The windows of the clubhouse can be seen in the rear view mirror. Some of the lights inside are on, while most of them are off. The last time Enzo had been here, which was some months ago, he had assumed that the window where the lights behind it were typically on is the library, although the curtains are usually drawn together and he cannot see what's inside. He imagines that it is a library and that there is a middle-aged lady inside, a bookworm, and she reads all kinds of books, whether literature, philosophy, or self-help. She spends most of her time reading. There have been days that Enzo himself has been akin to that lady. In fact, he had once spent an entire day reading a book about coffee, the many types of coffees, descriptions of their taste and colors. It had encouraged him to give mocha, a beverage that he had previously disliked, another chance. Thanks to the book and the descriptive nature of the author, he had grown a fondness to the taste of mocha. Enzo finally exits his car and takes his seat at the picnic table nearby the jungle gym. He runs his eyes along the dense woodland in the distance ahead of him and observes how the shy sun crawls further behind the trees. The further down the sun goes, the darker the trees become until they are only silhouettes and until the foggy night has completely succeeded the foggy day. It is dark enough now for the faraway streetlights and lights through the windows in the clubhouse behind him to seem brighter than they really are. This is when Enzo slips out his packet of colorful sweets from his pocket and tears open the wrapper, and he twists open the sealed cap of his cold bottle coffee. It is a rather spontaneous conclusion, but he will be spending most of his night here as he still has no plan in his head for where else to go. It seems that this is his natural destination. Confetti Street isn't all so bad after all. Lying straight back on the bench, he stares up at the blank black canvas for the sky and pops a tiny sweet in his mouth every once in a while, as his mind drifts further and further away from his body. Why hadn't he stayed here in Pilot's Wish sooner? Is it possible for him to ever grow tired of this town? If he had come here sooner, as soon as he had turned 20 and started thinking about living a quiet life, where would he be in this very moment? Would he have settled in a bigger house, bigger than the studio apartment in which he resides? In the first place, would he, as a young man, have admired this town as much as he does now? It is a curious thing how in life one small event leads to another, and eventually leads to bigger things, and everything big and small stacks up and transforms who we really are. We are never permanent. We are what we have consumed, what we have observed, what we have thought, heard, smelt. We are the outcome of our own reaction to obstacles. It is curious, beautiful, sad. It is so many things at once. It is the human experience, and it is what is necessary to complete it. There were times in Enzo's life that he had wished he had pursued a more creative career. There are things he sometimes wishes he had done or didn't do, but he doesn't let himself delve so deeply into regret. If he does, how then would he be content with the present? When he was younger, as most young people do, he had aimed to change the world. How ambitious the young! The thought of being a nobody in this life disturbed him so much that he had lost so much sleep over it. He had overthought his direction in life. It had caused him tremendous stress, the chase for worldly luxury and insatiable hunger. In the end, he would much rather be right here, in this empty playground outside the lonely clubhouse where there is possibly a lady reading endlessly in the library who Enzo will possibly never meet. Enzo sits up to take a sip of his coffee and then turns around in his seat and leans back against the table. Looking at both the white chocolate and dark chocolate, he contemplates which one to unwrap first. The colorful candy was a tad too sweet, so maybe dark chocolate is a better choice for now. He tears open the wrapper and breaks off a cube. Staring at the curtained window of the library in the clubhouse, he pops the cube in his mouth and lets it melt instead of chewing on it. All the while, he imagines being the lady alone in the library with her face buried in a book, surrounded by the warm orange lights and ceiling-high bookcases. She, too, is helping herself to her dark chocolate bar, one cube every half an hour or so, and coffee, too. Her milk coffee is in a mug, and it is iced, as she prefers cold coffee as well. The next cube that Enzo pops in his mouth, he takes a sip of milk coffee along with it. The lady in the library follows suit. This is how the people of PELLA'S wish spend their time. There is no excitement, but only with the lack of excitement they have found serenity. It must be late by now, and the window is still lit up. Enzo tears open the wrapper for the white chocolate and breaks off a cube. He savors it while staring up at the rooftop of the clubhouse. He imagines that there is a man up there staring ahead at the street lights of the highway, while the lady downstairs in the library reads her books. He is up there sitting on the rooftop ledge and staring at the empty but bright highway. Isn't it strange that there are some people around Enzo, but that he won't cross paths with any of them? There they are in their own worlds, minding their own business. Alone together, the people of PELLA'S wish. How wonderful. When Enzo opens his eyes, he finds that he has woken up in the early hours before sunrise, and he has no idea when he had slept, nor did he intend to sleep or feel like it. Nonetheless, he had enjoyed last night sufficiently, so it wasn't disappointing that he had slept the rest of it away. With his cheek pressed against the picnic table and his eyes closed again, he wraps his arms around his head and feels his diaphragm expand with every deep breath, the cold, fresh air filling his lungs. Then he stretches up in his seat and rotates his body left and right, his bones cracking, muscles loosening. Leaning back against the table, he helps himself to a cube of white chocolate and dark chocolate each, and takes several sips of milk coffee along with them, all whilst observing the stubby disc-shaped building before him. The lights in the library are no longer on. The window has no glow to it anymore. Perhaps the lady in the library has slept with her head quite literally buried in her book. The man on the roof? Is everybody who was here last night still here? Did everybody accidentally fall asleep, a strange phenomenon? And everybody wakes up at the same time and continues doing what they were doing? Nobody here will know about this mass phenomenon. Nobody here will inquire. If it were the end of the world, PELLA'S wish would be the last to hear about it. They will linger, all oblivious, while the rest of the world screams in agony and panic. They will be sipping on their coffees and daydreaming. Blurry images of his most recent dream begin trickling into his skull, and so his mind begins drifting towards them. He sees a long, endless bridge. It is nighttime, foggy, and there is a row of abandoned cars along one side of the road, parked along the rails of the bridge. The cars are all uniform in shape and color, light gray sedans. There is a massive body of water beneath the bridge. When the dream had started, he was already wandering over to one of the cars, and once he had reached it, he had checked the ignition and was not surprised to see that the keys were still in there, and that when he had turned it, the engine started. None of this was surprising, and he wasn't confused. Instead, it was like a routine to him, strange as dreams are. Then he had turned the car onto the road and drove on, unaware of what was ahead. Looking out the open window and peering through the fog, he had seen distant city lights, although he was certain that there was nobody in those cities. When he had reached the end of the bridge, the downslope led him onto a road. He drove on for what seemed like an hour until, in the distance ahead, he saw dark shapes and dim but colorful lights. The closer he got, the more he uncovered. It was a series of gigantic funfair structures along either roadside. Some were powered on and most were dead. The moment he had reached the scene, he had parked the car in the middle of the road and gone outside. He arched his neck to see the top of the tall roller coaster ride before him while wandering over to the control room. When he had gotten inside the room, he had sat in the chair and continued looking at the ride through the window. Then he had wondered what it would look like with the power on, and so he scanned the control panel in front of him in search of the button that will turn the lights on. It wasn't hard to figure. There were only two buttons, one labeled lights and the other labeled ride. He hit both of them simultaneously and watched how the ride powered on, how the car had stopped the beginning of the rail, swooped down and over to the end of the rail and back again. It wasn't a long, windy ride. There were many other twisty ones around here, but this one was the kind that zooms back and forth between a short distance but steep heights. The music wasn't exciting. It was slow and quiet, nearly a monotonous hum emitting from the speakers in the roof of the control room he was sitting inside. After having seen the car rush up the rail and dive back down 30 times, he left the control room and moved on to the next structure. This one was a tunnel. There was no title to this amusement, just a tall, bare concrete entrance with warm down lights in the high ceiling. He saw that at the very end of this incredibly lengthy path, it was daytime on the other side. As tempted as he was to head through this tunnel, he decided to explore the rest of the structures. The next one was a huge haunted mansion. Only a countable few of the windows glowed, while most of the building was draped in deep dark blue shadows. Though it was meant to be a haunted mansion, it didn't look particularly horrid. It was rather dreary, but dreary to Enzo means pleasant, and so he had walked up the 3 small steps leading to the door of the mansion and pushed it open. As he had expected, there was nothing particularly interesting to look at. He had treaded the stairwell, sat inside the empty rooms, looked out the windows. He had stayed here and wandered about for the remainder of the dream. Now that he has recalled the dream, he wonders what the man on the roof of the clubhouse and the lady inside the library had dreamt about. Did they share the same dream as Enzo? Were they there with him? Still unseen but within his vicinity? How wonderful. Alone together they are, the people of PELLA'S wish. By the time Enzo gets up from the picnic table, the sun has risen and all his confectionery will have finished. Standing at his car, he takes one last look at the clubhouse and pops one more sweet into his mouth before getting inside his car and driving off. First thing first, he makes a stop at his studio apartment to take a bath, brush his teeth, comb his hair, and change into a new set of clothes. All the while, he doesn't intend to stay here long, neither does he have a plan for where to go still. Nonetheless, he spends a short time in the stairwell and tiptoes to look out through the small square window and at the unfinished building across from him. Then he heads back down to the parking lot and gets back inside his car. As he drives, he still does not have a destination in mind. He is simply meandering along the road, slowing down from time to time to catch sight of a faraway tree or a house or a bench. There is a tennis court encompassed in wire fence. Along one side of the wire fence there is a row of seats. Enzo had sat in one of them before, with a mocha in his hand, and he had laid down in the center of the court and let his mind go beyond the sky while his eyes remained stuck there until the moon peeked its little bald chalky head into his view. As if it were telling him bedtime stories, he had closed his eyes and let his imagination loose. He had been brought back to his childhood, a sleepless night, how he had trailed his big, wonder-filled eyes along the many glow-in-the-dark stars in the ceiling. He had been brought to his teenage years when he had been walking back home from school one day and suddenly got tired and decided to rest at a petrol station. Time ticked away and left him behind. Before he knew it, he was walking back home at night. He had been brought to a time he had fallen sick and could not attend work because of it. At night, when it seemed he could not abate the sickness on his own, he had gone to the clinic. He sat in the waiting area and watched a nature documentary on the TV until it was his turn to get checked by the doctor. Parking his car at the roadside, Enzo looks past the wire fence and at the center of the cot and refreshes the many memories he had explored that night. At one of the condominiums in which he once resided, he used to sit on the edge of a platform outside and look up at the open stairwell of his block. The fluorescent light in one of the landings used to waver and buzz, and there was a stain in the wall, the result of stubborn graffiti that refused to leave even as it was being scrubbed off. Enzo had often stood on that landing and looked out the aperture at the roofs of nearby houses and at street lights casting their warm glow down onto the streets and back alleys. There were so many other places he had dug out from his memories and explored when lying down in the center of this court. Perhaps he will revisit this tennis court another time. For now, he will drive on and see where the sea will wash him up. This here is not where he is meant to be. There is a feeling that will tell him where he is supposed to be. And it is Monozuelo Street. Killing the engine, he remains in his car and pops a cube of white chocolate into his mouth, letting it melt as his eyes wander along the deteriorating walls of dead houses. Although these houses have long been abandoned, there is a trace of energy, a faint hint of what used to be its everyday. There were people waking up early in the morning, jogging, strolling, smiling, the smell of glorious coffee in the air. Now all that is left is an invisible version of them. There are ghosts everywhere. They are not harmful, but they are sad. Sad that their physical bodies are no longer in this town, that they have decided against living here for the rest of their lives. Now there is only Enzo to keep them company. He exits his car and enters one of the houses on his left. This house in particular is one of the least deteriorated ones in the row. Out of all the windows, only 2 has no glass panes. The walls still retain most of its original color too, off-white with dashes of pink. There was only 1 chair at the dinner table. It can't be assumed that all the other chairs have been stolen. The ceiling has crumbled to the point that rubble begins falling and defacing the below, though only flakes of dried paint has made their way down here. There's 1 chair here. Was it left here for Enzo? How considerate of this house to have left him something to lounge in. The stairwell is relatively clean from dust, considering how long it has been unused. It is quite impressive and curious too. It really is as though the house has a life of its own and tidies itself up where it can. Trailing his finger along the handrail, he treads the stairs up to the corridor above. There are 4 rooms here, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. On the left, the rooms are smaller, presumably what used to be the children's rooms. On the right is the master bedroom and then the bathroom. Through either window in the rooms on the left, Enzo can see his car in the street below, and both rooms are equally empty and nearly identical in fact. In the master bedroom, the first thing Enzo sees is the wooden bed frame, and so he sits in it and runs his gaze along the walls and ceiling for some time. Then it is time for him to get out of this house. He would much rather observe these houses from the outside while in his car, sipping on coffee and munching on his confectionery. And so he does just that. Thank you for listening to this episode of PELLA'S Wish for a Liminal World. Until next time.